Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Ken.
Good to see you back again, Dr. Ricks.
Glad to be
Missed
here.
you last week. I'm sure everybody else did as well.
I saw it. I saw you all, but you couldn't hear me, and oh well. Let's we'll work that out next year.
When you go out of town, you just got to find people with good internet speeds. Tell them you're not
Yes.
going to visit them unless they have 20 up and or 20 down and 3 or 4 up. That's your requirement. So
Got you.
all right. Tonight we're on episode 235 of Line Upon Line, understanding the Genesis creation scriptures in depth and the stupidity of evolution. So, with that being said, Dr. X, if you would start us out with some jokes, we would really appreciate it.
This one's called The Burial Rites. An old man and woman had been married for many years. They really hated each other, didn't like each other, yelled at each other a lot. And the old man, he said, I know I'm going to die first. I'm bitter and angry, and I'm going to dig my way out of the grave. And I'm going to haunt you when I'm gone. And a lot of weird things happened in the neighborhood, so people kind of feared him. They wondered, did he have something going for him? They were and he liked being feared. They were so relieved when he died. And at the funeral, the wife closed the casket, and after the service, she went to a bar to party. He's gone. A friend said, well, aren't you worried he's going to dig his way out of the grave and haunt you? And she said, let him try. I buried him upside down. And you know that men do not like to ask for directions. Yeah. Okay. The next one is called Baby Help. Baby Help. Nancy's nephew was 4 when she was pregnant and with her first kid. And so she allowed the little 4-year-old to put his hand on her tummy, and he felt the baby kicking. And she said, he's trying to get out, isn't he? And he said, well, how does the baby get out of there? The woman said, don't worry about it. I'll get the help of a doctor. And the little boy says, you mean the doctor's in there too? That is pretty bad, isn't it? Okay. These are called truisms for growing old. Truisms. When you're growing old, going out is good, but coming home is better. And this is one that really is true. People say you look great. They say that about us all the time. But then the implication is for your age. Here's another truism. When you needed the discount, you had to pay full price. Now you get the senior discount for everything, movies, hotels, flights, and you're too tired to use them. And the final one, your spouse is counting on you to remember things you don't remember.
It's only because we don't care.
And we don't care, we don't remember. By the way, you younger folks, the day will come when all this will make sense to you. Okay, enough of that corny humor. You don't hear humor like this just everywhere, right?
No, you don't.
I still like the one. You get all those discounts, but when you needed them, when you were younger, you didn't get them. And now, never mind. Okay. Understanding the time gap of Genesis chapter 1. And this is one of the ones that I think is most important. Remember, critics of the Bible, they don't want to take a designer, creator seriously. So they, pretty much discount the creation story in the Bible. But the Bible says evidence of a great designer and the Creator is really evident by the things that are made. Before we get into it, let's look at that first slide for a minute. And then we'll see how the truth of that statement is so true.
All right. Romans 1:19, because what may be known of God is manifest in them. Hold on, I can't see that. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. And now we're down to Genesis 1:1.
Okay, before we read 1:1 and 1:2, I just want to mention this point, that that's how mankind feels in general. In general, and I believe it happened during the pre-flood period, and then later when, the first Nimrod and Babylon was built, knowledge of God was available, and people can look at the complexity of creation. I mean, you take something like a hunting dog, and you ask yourself, you could give a science lab $100 million grant, and they could take a dog and maybe interbreed the dogs and they could make changes in dogs that already exist, but they could not make a dog from scratch. I mean, you give them 100 million, they couldn't do it. 200 million, they couldn't do it. A dog has his sense of smell, hearing, the software that controls his behavior. Dog usually are sleek and fast, where most of them are. I mean, and that's just one creature.
Right.
I've never heard of the science lab. Where do they breed that dog?
Now, here's the thing that they did a study many, many years ago, and they did it over a period of a very long time, of fruit flies. They wanted to prove evolution through fruit flies. So they took and they through radiation and mutation and all kinds of methods mutated maybe hundreds of thousands of fruit flies. Not one single fruit fly was better than the original. Every copy died shortly after it was, after it was born. And I mean, they had all kinds of like 6 wings. I mean, they were all mutations, and they were all inferior to the original. And they finally abandoned their research because they weren't getting anywhere. They couldn't prove it. Only thing you get close to evolution is adaptation.
And all that proves is how great the creation is. God has built into the genes of species, they can adapt. I mean, now they can only adapt so far. I mean, like, you're not going to be able to get a dog to adapt to become a whale with a blowhole on the top of his head and swim in the ocean, but dogs can adapt to all kinds of weather. Anyway, by the way, the reason they use fruit flies is because their lifespan was so short. You could have many, many, many generations in a short time period. They could mess one up, but his genes would still do the same thing they always did. They even tried it with mice. Mice is not as easy as fruit flies. They kept chopping off their tails because mice still fairly generation. After many, many years of experiments, guess what? The genes for the mice's tails were the same. They thought they would get shorter and shorter. It didn't. In other words, the genes, you can mess an animal up by messing up his genes, and he is a freak, which probably can't reproduce and is weaker. But you cannot show evolution, and they have tried all kinds of things. It can't. It just genetics are what they are. God built them, and that's and this idea that we can evolve from one animal to another one to a better animal.
Ben Stein did a documentary movie called Expelled, where he went through this. And he talked to very liberal people, and he talked to scientists, and he compared the different things. And then he went and did some historical research on eugenics and stuff like this. And then at the end, he goes into the double helix chain and explains that our DNA, the way it is it just cannot. It's impossible for this to just randomly happen. It's all put together by some creating hand was on this for every step of the way. It's a pretty good show. We after services one day, I said, "Who'd like to stay and watch this?" And everybody did. We just watched that as a group, and it's pretty interesting.
Ben Stein.
Ben Stein, Expelled. I have a copy somewhere around here.
I've watched it. It's good. It's worth watching.
Okay, now let's go to the bottom of Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, because that part is the gap part that's misunderstood by a lot of Christians.
Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth became or was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters.
Leave that up for just a minute. On verse 2, according to the commentaries I have, the word could be translated was or became, one or the other. You could either word, it could be. So we're going to look at both of them. And so God created the heavens and the earth, and then the earth became without form and void. Let's look at that approach, that one first. That is the one that I think is most likely. And what we think is, and this seems to fit the facts, is that something happened to take the planet Earth and to ruin it, to destroy it, make it, tohu and bohu means formless, void, darkness. And we think it was the angelic war between Lucifer, the good angels, and the bad angels. Let's look at the next slide, and we can see why our church thinks that, and it fits the facts.
All right. Isaiah 14:12. How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How you are cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit. Those who see you will gaze at you and consider you, saying, is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world as a wilderness and destroyed its cities, who did not open the house of its prisoners?
Note verse 17, who made the world as a wilderness. Now, obviously, some of this applies to both the king of Babylon and to Satan, the real ruler of Babylon. But, a king, especially in those days, they could do a lot less damage than we can do today. I would say they could not take this world to a wilderness level, but Satan and his war could. And it's very logical that they could throw around meteors and other things to create, almost as if Satan is saying in his war with the angel, well, if I can't have it, I'll just mess the whole thing up if I can't get my way. But whatever happened, we believe that's what happened to the world. It just seems to make sense. Also, it makes sense in another way, too. And the world sat there for a long time in tohu and bohu from verse 1 and 2 is because we have these great ferns and animal creatures like dinosaurs who probably existed on the first earth. When they were suddenly destroyed, they didn't get to, like if an animal falls in the forest and everything is normal, his skin dissolves and slowly decays into dust. But if there's a horrible cataclysm, all that biological material stuffed in and pushed down underground, and our fossil fuels are basically those huge ferns and animals. As they decay, they turn into oil, natural gas, coal. I guess a few turn into diamonds. All that's fossil fuel. And it could be God saw what Satan was doing and put that fossil fuel in there for mankind to help us in these latter 4 or 5 centuries of human history. I guess they've used coal for more than that, but the oil and stuff has been around just for a few centuries, used as we do now. All that makes more sense. That's why the world is as it is. But some say, well, what about was the other way you could translate it? I really think even if we take the word was, it doesn't change things much. Here's how it could easily have happened. God had a universe full of planets. And by the way, if you look at the universe now, there are plenty of planets out there, even the ones in our solar system, but they're chaotic and they're messed up in one way or another. Some are gas giants with poison gases all around like Venus. They all have one problem or another. Life on those planets could not exist. They have to be terraformed, totally changed. God could take the planet, maybe moved it into the right zone, from the sun or whatever he wanted to do, and he terraformed or changed that planet from the chaos it had and created it in 7 days to what we have now. Either translation still doesn't change things much from our point of view. I still like the Satan perspective better. I think it fits better, but either way, it fits the facts. And if you see some religious group saying, oh, the planet has to be 7,000 years old. No, it doesn't. See, God doesn't tell us how old it is. So if radioactive dating, which doesn't have to be totally accurate, but if it indicates the earth is at least older than 7,000 years, that's not a problem for the Bible. A lot of people don't know about the difference between verse 1 and verse 2. It's called the gap. And if our understanding will help us we don't have to fight with science about how old the earth is. By the way, even their estimates vary in hundreds of millions of years, so they're not nailed down accurate, but the earth is probably older than 7,000 years. And it is possible that there were animals like dinosaurs and maybe even other animals that existed hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of years ago that are buried under there. And some of their fossils might be seen. That in no way alters the fact that God remade the world in 6 days and made man.
We know they existed because we find their skeletons all the time. We know there was the giant creatures that don't exist anymore. And while carbon dating is very flawed, it is obvious, I think, that they are much older than 7,000 years old. They try to force God and his timeline into their belief of their ignorance of Genesis. And it's not necessary. You don't have to do that. It's very simple. And another thing supports this. There's the demons hate water. They didn't want to be thrown into water. And when Christ put them into the pigs and ran them into the water, they don't like when if they spent their time on the earth when it was void and it was covered in water, that would tend to make it something they'd want to avoid again. You can find verses that support that.
Go ahead, Dave. You're going to say something?
Well, I had a fellow come in and he told me, he disproved the Bible, and I said, how? He says the Bible says the earth is 6,000 years old in science. I said the Bible doesn't say that anywhere. And he said, I just did a semester at USF, and they explained it to me. You don't know your Bible. That's the problem, because I did a 6-week course on it, and now I'm an expert. And it's
6-week course.
Yeah,
and he's an expert on the Bible.
Yes. At which time I said, "There's no talking to this guy."
You should have asked him if he could get a refund because he needs to.
Yeah, and
I'd ask for my money back.
God doesn't give us all the details of creation, but I can believe the Bible and the things we don't know, like how long it's set void and formless and dark. We don't. God doesn't say how long it's set like that.
And there's a reason. We don't need to
worry about it.
If we need to know what's in there, otherwise, don't worry about it. And I think if people spend a lot of time worrying about stuff that's not there, that's not important, looking for different signs in the sky or whatever for Christ, the end time coming, I think when the time comes, if you're doing what you're supposed to do, the Holy Spirit will guide you what you need to do. So,
by the way, you mentioned, I think Ken, you mentioned about, or was it Dave, about the complexity of DNA, RNA, and they've now found something new called structural instructions within the cell. I don't even fully understand it, but they say it's also part of what makes an animal an animal. But the complexity of DNA, they study genes, all that stuff, and they concluded, it's unbelievable, by reverse math, that all people on this earth came from one female. I don't know how they do it, but they did it mathematically. And it was about 6, 7, or 8,000 years ago. The similarity to that, to the Bible, and of course, that assumes you make adjustments on generations. Is it 20 years between children, or longer, or shorter? So the estimate has some fluidity to it, but the fact that it's so close to the Bible is like, and that story never got out. They didn't publicize that widely because it fits the Bible too well.
Right. An honest mathematician, and there's been quite a few high-level mathematicians that have done the math. Everything boils down to math. You can't mess with math. When they do the math on the odds of creation versus the odds of the Big Bang and evolution, the math falls apart. You can look this up online. And there have been quite a few mathematicians that said through math, they proved there could be no evolution and no Big Bang.
Oh,
it just can't be.
By the way, when they believed in the Big Bang, that theory was the world was exploded and all the matter was going out and increasing, speed. And the Big Bang would imply that, as the energy from the bang gets weaker, hope I say this accurately, the speed of all the outgoing material would slow down and slow down and slow down. Well, I'm not saying it isn't burning out, but what they find is the universe is spreading out and speeding up. I think all the Big Bang proves is the universe had a beginning. But it wasn't a Big Bang, it was just a beginning. God started it. And the fact that it's not behaving like they thought shows it wasn't a Big Bang, it was a start. I'm not even sure what it means that the universe is expanding at ever-increasing speed. We'll find out someday. It may have some meaning. The universe is getting bigger.
Yeah, it's expanding.
I mean, that's shocking.
Yep.
And it shouldn't happen that way if it was just an explosion, you see? Well, they actually have some other theories, but it's not fitting their theory, but they're not giving up. They're not going to admit that there was a creator or someone started it and controls it.
No, they can't do that. Once they pull God out of science, their theories fall apart. I mean, all their major theories, all the big stuff like evolution and creation, when you pull God out of the equation, out of the science, now you've left science now. Now you're in fantasy land, and you have to do crazy things to get to where you want to be. Let's say you want to get to no life in the universe to life in the universe. You've got to believe that on the planet Earth, it formed, it cooled, and somehow we got water vapor, and it rained down on rocks, and the rain on the rocks broke the rocks down, and they pooled in a soup of goo on the planet, and then some magic lightning bolt hit this soup of goo, and we had a single-celled organism just formed, or a little spark of life formed out of nothing. And that's how you got to get to the most complex machines, which are human beings, the most complex machines you can imagine. Just alone, the human eye is extremely complex. And it's, they get there by removing God from that so-called science. They have to get you to believe this trash, that rain fell on rocks and we get humans. Yeah, okay, it sounds crazy now, but let's add 10 billion years to it. All of a sudden, I'm brilliant. So we had time and we're brilliant. It happens, and you just say it, you're nuts. So the only way they can get you to sound normal is, this happened over billions and billions of years. No, rain didn't fall on rocks and we didn't get humans, a few billion years later.
My brother was in second grade.
Go ahead.
My brother was in second grade, and the teacher was explaining this to him, and he's a thinker. And he sat there, and Drew believed in God, and he sat there and he said, "That's really neat. How long does it take for a typewriter to evolve?" And she said, "Well, typewriters don't evolve." Remember, he's in second grade. See, a typewriter can't evolve. It's too complex because it has all the letters on it and the keys. And he says, "Yeah, my brain did, right?" In second grade.
Yeah. And by the way, think about the greatness of the human brain. All the things that people are able to build and do are a credit to whoever created our brain. I mean, like, you know, they're working on robots who can build other robots and who can do creative things. And that is quite something. And I'm not saying they won't eventually get better and more creative robots, but you realize that is a very, very advanced robot. Well, think about human beings. All the things that people can do, good and bad, clever and...
Do you think it's as enjoyable?
That is quite something, the invention of the human mind.
Be quiet, Dave.
You know, my doctor was telling me that the human eye that your brain will only pick up 10% of what the human eye is actually capable of seeing. And so I think that's really fascinating.
Right. The human eye is capable of seeing, but it doesn't, into the ultraviolet and beyond, I think. So, you mean it's capable of doing a lot more than it is allowed to do. I go back to that verse in the Bible where, was it Isaiah asked God to clear the eyes of his servant to see the now, did God just make him able to see what was actually there? Did he just say, okay, now you can see in this range of light, this wavelength of light that you normally can't? They're all out there, but you can't see them. I mean, it's just kind of fascinating to think about. The Bible is full of science. The Bible is full of fascinating things that most people in the past and even the present think of as you know, magic and hocus, that kind of hocus. It's all science, but it's a science we don't understand because we're not of the caliber of the being that created it. But it is science.
By the way, you know, the Bible mentions the circle of the earth, and this is mentioned thousands of years ago when they didn't know about the world being round, or it mentions mountains in the bottom of the ocean. Well, that's something they've only discovered with many subs in recent decades. How did those ancient men know that? They knew it because God told them.
It also mentions, he says, you made the worlds, multiple or plural worlds, where other religions say the earth is flat and the sun rotates around the earth and that the lights in the sky are cracks in the floor in heaven. I mean, the things that come from these other...
and thunder is God bowling. Yeah, I get you. And I believe the Bible says, I have to look at, that the earth is hung on nothing. Actually, it's magnetism between us and the sun, but basically the earth is hung on nothing. It's suspended. And that's in the Bible, written thousands of years ago. There's no way they could have known that except God told them. But let's move on to the next slide as we get into a few of the things that we want to mention here. We can't mention everything, but I want to mention a few of them.
Genesis 1:9. Then God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good.
We were discussing this before the program, but just to make it a real simple, commentaries believe the first chapter of Genesis is a process where God is describing taking the chaotic earth and first clearing away all the dust so you can see the sun and you get light. And then the moisture was all hooked up together, and God created what we would now call the sky, where some water was down in the ocean and others was up in the sky. And then he fine-tuned the earth. And you'd have to read some books like The Privileged Planet, which does a great job with diagrams showing you how the earth, how we spin on the axis, how fast it is, the tilt of the earth, the distance of the moon from the surface, the distance of the earth and our atmosphere with filters control the environment and the weather and the seasons. It's like a fine-tuned machine. And God did all that in that first couple of days mentioned in Genesis. And I think you almost have to read a science book to fully appreciate the greatness of, because if the earth didn't spin the right way, if our orbit around the sun wasn't perfect, our weather would be so screwed up we'd die. I mean, it wouldn't work.
Yeah. A lot of people don't know that we're actually closer to the sun in the winter than we are in the summer by 2 million miles. We're actually closer when it's cold and further away when it's warm because of the tilt of the axis.
And we may not understand all the reasons why God built it the way he built it, but it's true. I have some may have to do with the flood of Noah too, may have been a factor in it. When God kicked Adam and Eve out of the garden, I think God allowed the earth to be a much more dangerous place than it was when Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden. And I think God will, in the future, however he does it, change our atmosphere or the filters so that in the future, the world will probably have summer all year long. Dave and I were discussing that. Or at least it'll be a much, much better climate than the world has now. It'll be like paradise.
Yeah, there's evidence that at one time the Earth had a layer of water around it, like an aquasphere, your atmosphere, your ionosphere, your stratosphere, and maybe a layer of water. Maybe it could have been why the people lived so much longer. You know, it would explain a lot. And the world would have been like a terrarium. There would have been no winter.
Yeah, and God can bring that back. Or, you know, some people say, I love winter, like the Norwegians who win in the Olympics. You know, God may put ice on the mountains for people who like to ski. But I believe that God created a paradise. And then when they got kicked out of the Garden of Eden, mankind lost a lot of that. And we'll get it back when Christ returns. Let's go to the next slide. I know that's a complicated subject about what God will do in the future, but it'll be interesting to see.
Genesis 1:29, and God said, See, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food. Also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth in which there is life. I have given every herb for food, and it was so.
Based on that scripture, people believe that all animals in the Garden of Eden were plant eaters. And probably when they got kicked out of the Garden of Eden, those animals which Adam could have petted and probably named in the Garden of Eden, some of them were now dangerous and became meat eaters and had poisonous, fangs, etc. And let's go to the next slide. We believe God will correct all that in the world tomorrow that's coming. He'll set up paradise again.
Isaiah 11:7. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play by the cobra's hole, and the weaned child shall put his hand in the viper's den. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea.
And maybe that's only 20 years away when God will, whenever God puts it into place, he's going to change the nature of animals as well as the planet. It'll be wonderful when Christ comes back. Because this is a dangerous place. We were talking to somebody about there's some bugs like hornets that are very dangerous. You'd be amazed at the dangers that exist out there in the woods.
I find it interesting. It looks like the earth had become destroyed. Darkness was on the face of the deep and all of that. And he tried to fix it again through Adam. And we've blown it. He then flooded the earth and tried again with Noah, and we've blown it. And this time he's going to have to flood it again. And Christ, because of his giving of his life, when he comes back, it'll be done right.
Yeah, and I do believe, however the details work out, when God, in Book of Revelation, right before Christ comes back, God will send plagues on this world to crush the beast and his armies, and I guess anybody else that he feels needs to be crushed. So God is going to come back, and he won't be playing nice when he comes back the next time. There's going to be earthquakes and, well, a lot of bad things are in the book of Revelation. A lot.
Yep. It'll be pretty much wrecked the next time around.
Have we asked for it or what, though? I mean, really?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Mankind in general has rejected God. I believe the Church of God will be in places of safety, and there will be some heroic martyrs too, of course. But the world in general, their great armies and whoever else is out there opposing God is going to be crushed. And then God is going to turn this world back into a paradise. Let's go to our last section, the value of humanity. I believe that the book of Revelation reveals how valuable human beings are. If you look at most pagan cultures, man was not that important. The gods just kind of used and abused them for their own pleasure. And the gods were more like bad people. You know, there's a female consort, male consorts, and you read Greek mythology and others. The gods were about as bad as the people were. And that's how the pagans saw them. But the book of Genesis puts man in a high position that I think we need to be aware of. God put man as the caretaker of the earth and told Adam that we would be the caretaker of the earth. Let's go to our next slide and realize how important mankind is and the way God has things set up.
Psalms 8:5, for you have made him a little lower than the angels, and you have crowned him with glory and honor. You have made him to have dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet.
It's kind of disingenuous to not admit that man is the dominant species. I saw some radical was on TV and they call it speciesism, speciesism. I thought, that's the dumbest. You think your species is better than others. Well, the earth was made
You gotta
for
be
man.
kidding me. Speciesism? They made a new word up for this crazy?
You know, they made it up, and I'm not kidding. And obviously man is the most intelligent, dominant species on the planet. You'd be crazy not to admit that.
It's almost as bad as cultural appropriation.
My wife and I first got married, we were watching something, and they were talking about the animals having just this trepidation of man, you know, as they're, led to slaughter. And my wife said, well, according to them, you know, we all evolved. So I worked my way to the top of the food chain. They need to be afraid of me. You know, I worked these millions of years to be on top of the food chain. Lamb, you need to be afraid. You chickens too. And the fact of the matter is, those animals are too stupid to be afraid. They're unaware of their own existence. You know, a guy had a chicken. He cut its head off. It lived 18 months without a head. And he had it on exhibit, and he was feeding it with an eyedropper.
Is that really true?
Yeah, you can look it up.
One thing I do know, I had an uncle, and he was quite an uncle. He said, you kids love meat too much. Since we've been off the farm, and the younger generation didn't know much about the farm except what they told us, you all don't realize where food comes from. So we're having this big goose for whatever it was, Thanksgiving. So he let some of us kids cut off the goose's head. And to our shock, the goose ran round and round without its head, just bleeding. It's a gruesome sight. Apparently people in the country knew that. That's what happened. I mean, eventually it stopped running around, but anyway,
it is gruesome to watch. It's gruesome to watch. They run into stuff, fall down, get back up, and run again. Fall down. I've seen it many times.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's just the nervous system operating on its own. It's not thinking about it, but still, he wanted to show us the grisly side of meat. And guess what? It didn't stop us from being greedy anyway.
I had a kid up in my place, a 20-year-old kid, and I was watching a video on YouTube of this guy bow hunting for a moose. And it was amazing, the size of the animal and everything. And I said to this kid, watch this. And the guy shoots the moose, and this kid went nuts. Why would he do that? I can't believe he did that. I said, for the meat. He says, you don't kill something for meat. You go to the store. 20 years old.
20 years old. Milk comes from Winn-Dixie, right? And meat comes from Walmart.
Exactly.
Same kid had a flat tire, and I sent a 14-year-old girl out there to change it for him. So he didn't know how to change a tire.
I like this commercial. It's an insurance commercial. And the kid in the background says, is this the lug nut? Oh, yeah, that's the lug nut. It's, if you haven't seen it, you get the humor. These young people have no idea what a lug nut is. Oh, well. Let's go to the next verse, please.
All right, Genesis 126. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth.
Two things I get out of that. One is that if people were made in the image of God, that means we should respect human life, and that people are, well, it values human beings if we're made after God. And two, clearly, we're in charge of the planet. And we're supposed to take care of the planet, but it's made for man, not the opposite. And if you listen to some of the earth and animal worshipers, they actually put trees and animals before God. I even heard one, they were discussing killing baby seals and some others for mink coats. Oh, what a terrible thing is. And you kill these babies. And yet they were for aborting human babies. They didn't even see the irrationality of that. In other words, these baby seals were more valuable than baby human beings. And they write, well, we shouldn't have so many babies. I'm thinking, wow. I mean, granted, I'm not saying birth control has no place, but they're trying to discourage women from having babies and for discounting the importance of people.
I got in trouble.
Alternate reality. They don't live in reality. They live in a reality of their own creation.
Yeah, I made a comment just trying to be funny one time. I said, if you could get my gas under $1 a gallon, I'd personally club a baby seal for you. And it was not well received. So,
yes. But the earth is made for man, not man for the earth. Interesting thing, when God was getting ready to flood the pre-flood world, he was also going to destroy the animals that are with mankind, because I guess there's no man, you don't need him. Now, obviously, he found Noah, and that changed everything, but that's an interesting part of the story. There was one more thing that was created during that creation week. It's a spiritual thing. Let's go to our next two slides, and we will see the spiritual thing that God created during the creation week.
All right. Genesis 2:2. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. And now we're in Mark 2:27. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath.
And I get out of those two verses that, we can't really make a day holy. You can kind of make it special, but you can't make it holy. God made the seventh day holy. And I think people have tried to do 1 day and 10 the rest. It doesn't work. Man is built to need 1 day and 7 for rest, and I call it spiritual recuperation or spiritual rest. 1 day and 7, and that was made for man. And people who do weird things on the Sabbath to deprive themselves. It's clear from that whole section of Mark 2 that Christ was saying to the Pharisees, wait a minute, you've got all these Sabbath rules making people miserable. The Sabbath rest was a good thing for man. I mean, you tell somebody you get 1 day out of 7 off work and to spend more time with God, that's a good thing. And that's one of the most important things that came out of the creation week, the spiritual Sabbath day.
And it shouldn't be a burden. It should be the greatest day every week, a pleasure that you spend time with your wife and your kids and your loved ones. You go to church and spend time with your spiritual family, and you share your week, and you ask them questions about, how their aunt's doing, and they ask you, how's your back feeling? And you spend time being a family together, and then study the Bible together, and draw together in ways that maybe a lot of your blood family won't do with you. And it becomes, to me, it's a very special day. I don't get to go have lunch with my wife during the week. We're both working. On Sabbath after services, we get I guess we're at the age now where we get that early dinner at 3:30 in the afternoon. And we just spend time and make it a really special day. And so as a kid growing up, we couldn't watch TV, we couldn't listen to music, and Sabbath was a burden. And pretty much you have to rest. So either you're in church or you're laying around the house. And it shouldn't have been like that. It should have been a special time where the other kids at church, we hung out together and did things, because that made us special, because we weren't doing the other church stuff like the other churches do, and made the Sabbath really special for us.
Remember, when God lists his feast days, the first feast day he mentions is the Sabbath. It should be a feast day, a festive day. Enjoy it. That's what it's supposed to be. And spend that quality time with God.
Absolutely.
We can. We have one more scripture, and it's related to this whole thing about how important the Sabbath is.
All right, Hebrews 4:4. For he has said somewhere regarding the seventh day, and God rested on the seventh day from all his work. And again, in this passage, they shall not enter into my rest, since then it remains that some should enter into it. And since those who formerly had the good news preached to them did not enter in it because of unbelief. He again fixes a day, saying long afterward by David's lips, and words already quoted. Today, if you hear his voice, continue not to harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, he would not have spoken afterward of another day. So there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God.
And that's in the New Testament. Sabbath rest remains. And the original Israelite, older generation, didn't have faith in God, didn't trust God, didn't obey God. So they didn't get to enter their rest, the promised land. But the real promised land is the spiritual rest that's up ahead, the real one, the best one that we've got that's coming up. I know the King James just used the word rest, but if you were to check the original language, the word rest is mentioned a number of times, but when it gets to that last verse, number 9, the word is a variation of the Sabbatos. In other words, the word rest is a Sabbath rest. That's really a better translation of it. Why it didn't make King James? I can only take one good guess why it didn't make the King James translation. It's in others, but not the King James, some others. Because they've been keeping Sunday for centuries. That's why they didn't stick it in there. I mean, rest is not a bad translation, but a better translation would have been Sabbath rest. But they had, because the word changes in that verse. And I was thinking, if we look at all the elements of the creation week, the most important one is actually the Sabbath, the one that we're keeping now, we'll be keeping in the morning. So we can spend quality time with God and each other. And it is kind of special for all of us every week.
Yep, absolutely. Look forward to it every week.
Um, I can't really think of anything going on prophetically in the world that's all that significant. But in any thoughts, Ken or Dave?
No, not specifically. No.
I mean, the world is still the mess it's always been. Um, oh, here's a thought. I'm just pure speculation. It may have no meaning at all. You would have expected America to do better in the Winter Olympics. Now, our women did pretty well because it's easier to catch up in women's athletics, But how come American men didn't do better? And I'm wondering, is it an indication that we have gotten American men are getting softer?
I think so. I was thinking that same thing about the Olympics. Actually, I think it's a sign of what they are, what the women's movement and what media and political correctness is doing to the male. What do they call it? Toxic masculinity. They beat young men over the head till they're afraid to be men, and then they act out and go and shoot up schools. If they got to run around and play cops and robbers in recess, this kind of stuff probably wouldn't happen. But they don't get to do that.
Yeah, I just wonder if the men, that scripture about women rule over them and children, should abuse them. Well, oppress them. I think that scripture is really more of a criticism of the men, not of the women. I know that might sound, if the men were more men, the women wouldn't have to do as much and the children wouldn't be so out of control. It just makes me wonder, are the men in this country declining? Now, maybe that will reverse itself because things go in the trends, and maybe the next Olympic it'll be better. But I'm just wondering if colleges have taken away male athletic scholarships. I understand all that Title IX stuff. I'm not totally against that part. But I just wonder if they would allow colleges to have more male athletic scholarships and things like soccer and hockey, ice hockey, and some other things. It would help. I'll put it that way. And maybe more wrestling. I don't think a lot of college wrestling teams are out there because they're worried about not having an equal balance of male and female athletes. I understand some of that, but I just wonder if the trend may have gone too far. And we're, like you say, masculinity and strength in men is not being encouraged as much as it could be.
It's not being encouraged at all. It's being squashed every chance they get. If a kid shows the least amount of strength and masculinity and I don't know, self-assuredness, that's just squashed, and you're told you're rotten, you're no good, and they call you, sexist, racist, whatever they got to do to shut you down, and they do it, and then we have these kids act out these things in schools.
Yeah, I think so too. And we'll see. Maybe the next Olympics we'll have a turnaround. There'll be I haven't really looked lately, but the last time I was looking at TV shows that were current, the father is always the stupid buffoon.
Yep, it's been going on for 30 years, 40 years.
At least.
A wise, strong father figure is rare on television. Would you agree?
There aren't any.
My wife says there aren't any. I guess there must be some, but I can't really think of any right off the top of my head.
I had a guy call me and he said he was taking the psychology course about abusive men. And I said, "What'd you learn?" He says, "I found out that if my wife gets a bad haircut, it's my fault for not complimenting her enough so that she didn't need to cut her hair. That way she would feel just everything was his fault. I mean,
it is, don't you know?
Yeah, I probably could add another comment or two, but I'll shut up and stay out of trouble. But yes, I do think we aren't as, let's say, families are not balanced the way God would like it. And I know that they would probably say we have a culture that in the past has been more, what's the term for male-oriented culture? All of a sudden, I've forgotten the term. Patriarch-oriented. A patriarchal society. But isn't that really what the Bible has? The Bible wants strong men who are the spiritual leaders of their family and physical leaders too, but a patriarchal society. And we have a bunch of, I don't think what's the right word. Can't think of the word. Strong men or misbehaving men, and we don't have a lot of good, strong role models put out there for us. I'm sorry, Ken, I cut you off.
No. I was just gonna say the word you're looking for, lily-livered.
Probably all the good, strong men will write in and email Ken that he misunderstood. We have a lot of great men in this country, and we need to appreciate them. Right?
Yeah. Email Dave. He gets all the good mail, I'm sure. No, all right. Do we have any? Is there anything we missed that you want to cover? If not, then I'm going to say good night. I want to thank everyone again for joining us and starting your Sabbath with us. At least if you're in this time zone. If not, we hope you enjoy the rest of your Sabbath, and we'll see you back here again next week.
Thank you, Ken.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.